Happy New Year. Morning. Hey. So I'm actually giving a little commentary today. And our Torah reading is Genesis 47:28 to 50:26. That's the end of Genesis. 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 to 12, and John 13, chapters 1 to 19. And the theme, funny enough, that stood out to me, is all about transition, sort of about passing the baton. And I think you're going to probably see that here. And the setting of the first reading is the Israelites are in Egypt right now. The whole family of Joseph have moved there. They've prospered in the land of Goshen. And Joseph's father, Jacob, after living in Egypt for 17 years, is about to die. So the first thing we'll do is read chapter 48, verses 1 to 4. After this, Joseph was told, "Behold, your father is ill." So he took with him his two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim, and it was told to Jacob, "Your son Joseph has come to you." Then Israel's another name for Jacob, summoned his strength and sat up in bed. And Jacob said to Joseph, "God Almighty appeared to me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me, and said to me, 'Behold, I will make you fruitful and multiply you, and I will make of you a company of peoples, and will give this land to your offspring after you for an everlasting possession.'" So Jacob's words in this passage is just reiterating a promise that he received when he initially left Canaan. Remember with Esau, he had just stolen his birthright as well as the firstborn blessing. And so he was sent off to go to his uncle Laban. And as he went through to go to his uncle, he stopped at a place that Luz, which is now Luz, or Bethel is also referred to, and that's where you have the Jacob's ladder vision. So we all remember that. And that's where the Lord gave him the same promise as he had given before to Abraham and Isaac, that he will give the land of Canaan to Jacob and his offspring, and will multiply Jacob in the land. And the Lord also promised Jacob that he was going to bring him back to the land after his long sojourn with Laban. Now, however, God with a promise, it's often a little more long-standing than just the one generation. Right? There's more than just the immediate future in a promise. And we see in the second episode where this promise is given to Jacob, and that's in Genesis 46 in Beersheba, when he was on his way to Egypt to meet Joseph. Okay? Now Jacob was an old man at this time, and he was going to Egypt with his other sons because of the famine. They were going to live there. And in that case, the Lord tells Jacob not to be afraid to go to Egypt, that he would make Jacob into a great nation and also bring him back again, the same promise, and that Joseph would close his eyes, meaning that Joseph would be there with him when he died. And yes, indeed, Jacob does die in the land of Egypt with Joseph at his side. We see that. So part of this promise was fulfilled, but not all, right? And as Jacob lay dying, he knew that this promise had yet to be completed, that it wasn't yet fulfilled, that it was greater than his own lifetime, that it extended beyond his own lifetime to his offspring. So here we're going to be seeing Jacob preparing his offspring, his sons, his family, accordingly, okay? And he starts with Joseph. So let's continue with chapter 48, verses 5 and 7. And remember, this is Jacob talking to Joseph. "And now your two sons, who were born to you in the land of Egypt before I came to you in Egypt, are mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine, as Reuben and Simon are. And the children that you fathered after them shall be yours. They shall be called by the name of their brothers in their inheritance. As for me, when I came from Padan, to my sorrow, Rachel died in the land of Canaan on the way, where there was still some distance to go to Ephrath. And I buried her there on the way to Ephrath," that is Bethlehem. So here you see Jacob taking Joseph's two sons, Manasseh the older and Ephraim the younger. He takes them as his own, thereby giving them an inheritance in the land. Okay, he says, "And now your two sons who are born to you shall be mine, as Reuben and Simon are. So here, Reuben is Jacob's firstborn, and Simon was his secondborn. So he's essentially giving the place of the first and secondborn to Ephraim and Manasseh. And also, you remember Joseph was the firstborn of Rachel, right? He had two sons by the way of Rachel, Joseph, and then Benjamin. And Rachel was the wife he particularly loved. And that may be why he refers to Rachel in this passage. So what's he doing here? It seems he's giving that firstborn inheritance of a double portion. Remember, that's part of the firstborn inheritance, a double portion. He's giving it to Joseph through Joseph's sons. And also remember, Joseph is the typology of Messiah. Okay, so just keep that sort of in the back of your mind, because we're going to go forward again now and read verses 14 to 21 in chapter 48. Okay. And Israel, this is Jacob, this is with the two sons of Joseph, stretched out his right hand and laid it on the head of Ephraim, who was the younger, and his left hand on the head of Manasseh, crossing his hands, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, "The God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac walked, the God who has been my shepherd all my life long to this day, the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, bless the boys. And in them let my name be carried on, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac. And let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." When Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand on the head of Ephraim, who was his secondborn, it displeased him, and he took his father's hand to move it from Ephraim's head to Manasseh's head. And Joseph said to his father, "Not this way, my father, since this one is the firstborn. Put your right hand on his head." But his father refused and said, "I know, my son, I know. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his offspring shall become a multitude of nations." So he blessed him that day, saying, "By you Israel will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. Then Israel said to Joseph, "Behold, I am about to die, but God will be with you and will bring you again to the land of your fathers." So as I noted earlier, Jacob's blessing Joseph through his two sons. Okay, and it's interesting that Jacob puts the second son, Ephraim, ahead of the firstborn son, Manasseh. And that's a pattern we've already seen in the Bible, right? You see that with Abraham. Ishmael's his firstborn. Isaac was his second. The promise came through Isaac. We see that through Isaac. We had Esau, the firstborn, Jacob, the second. And the promise is going through the line of Jacob. So it's the second son here that is carrying the promise of the firstborn. And this is a significant pattern. You know, always look for patterns when you read the Bible. And it's an indication about God's plan, that it's not the first Adam through redemption, that redemption will come through, but it's the second Adam, who is Jesus, right? And you know the second Adam, you read that in 1 Corinthians 15. Now we go on in the reading. We read chapter 49 is all about the blessing that Jacob gives to all 12 of his sons. Verse 1 says, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you what shall happen to you in days to come." And I'm not going to go through the whole blessing. You can read that on your own if you want. Verse 28, "All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them." Okay? He blessed blessing to them, each suitable to each one of them. Now, these were prophetic words to them, okay? But not just to them, also to their progeny and to their descendants. So these last words of Jacob to Joseph and his sons are not only about Jacob preparing his own family, but also there's another level here. It's about God preparing his people for the revealing of the Messiah. Okay, now we're going to move to the Haftorah portion in 1 Kings. Okay, and David's about to die, okay, and he's given his last words to Solomon. Let me move this over here. Okay, who's his heir to the throne, and he's actually already on the throne. So I'm going to read 1 Kings 2, verses 1 to 4. Oh, yeah, for chapter 2, verses 1 to 4. When David's time to die drew near, he commanded Solomon his son, saying, I'm about to go the way of all the earth. Be strong and show yourself a man and keep the charge of the Lord your God, walking in the ways and keeping his statutes, his commandments, his rules, and his testimonies, as it is written in the law of Moses, that you may prosper in all that you do and wherever you turn, that the Lord may establish his word that he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons pay close attention to their way, to walk before me in faithfulness with all their heart and with all their soul, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. So the promise God had given David earlier, if you recall back, was about he was going to build a temple, right? A house for the Lord. But it wasn't him. It was going to be Solomon. So that promise was given. That's an immediate one. And we do see that transpire directly after this. But there's also a long-standing promise here that David would not lack a man to be on the throne of Israel if they stayed faithful to the Lord. Now, in the reading today, David actually commands, not just reminds Solomon to walk in the ways of the Lord. He commands him. This is serious. And he does that so that the promise that the Lord gave to David will not be hindered. Now, as with Jacob and his last words, David's not just looking to Solomon's lifetime, he's looking beyond. He's looking to generations to come. And he also adds strong advice here to enable his progeny to keep this promise on the forefront of their lives. So now we're going to turn to John chapter 13. I'm going to read verses 1 to 5 and 12 to 17. Now before the feast of the Passover, when Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. During supper, when the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God, rose from supper. He laid aside his outer garments, and taking a towel, tied it around his waist. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Now, jumping down to verse 12. When he had washed their feet and put on his outer garments and resumed his place, he said to them, do you understand what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for so I am. If I then, your teacher and Lord, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, that you also should do just as I have done to you. Truly, truly, I say to you, a servant is not greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. So as with the previous readings, we see a preparation. Jesus knows his time has come to die, so he's preparing his disciples. So what does he do? He takes an action of washing their feet. Now, we often see this as Jesus giving a demonstration of how to serve. Okay, but it's actually a lot more than this. It's deeper than that. Okay, you have to look at that statement in verse 1. It sort of sets the whole thing up. He says, he loved them to the end. This is an act of love. This is showing them how to love. He loves them because he shows them how to be ready. Okay, he wants them to succeed in their purpose. He's showing them this. So he's preparing them, okay, for what they have to do after Jesus leaves, after he dies. So this whole thing, again, is a demonstration of how to love one another. And he says this. He says, for I have given you an example that you should do just as I have done to you. If you know these things, blessed are you if you do them. And later on, you see that he talks about love, about how to love one another. And we're just going to jump down, and we're going to read verses 18 and 19 now. He says, I am not speaking of all of you. I know whom I have chosen, but the scripture will be fulfilled. He who ate my bread has lifted his heel against me. I'm telling you this now, before it takes place, that when it does take place, you may believe that I am he. And here he's warning them that he is going to be betrayed. Again, he's preparing them because he loves them. He doesn't want them to fall. This is so they can still stand and believe in him when they see this whole thing about the crucifixion taking place. Now, we've been talking about in all this about promises. when referring to Jacob and David. We talked about the promise God had given Jacob, the promise he had given to David. So what's the promise Jesus has from the Father? This is where you can go back to Isaiah 53. We know that passage, and I'm just going to quote verses 10 to 11. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He has put him to grief. When his soul makes an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Now, there are many facets of this promise, but the one that stands out here is really one of salvation and offspring, multiplication. And this is a familiar type promise, right, with Jacob. Now, however, during Jesus' time on earth, he didn't see the completion of this when he was living on earth. However, he's preparing his disciples. He prepares them to follow it through, to receive the promise, and to be part of his legacy. Now, these are all stories about transition, a passing on of the baton, and each person held a promise, a legacy, if you will, from God. But they were not the ones to see it through to completion or see the fulfillment of it. But what they did is they still carried forward that expectation. So each of them were preparing the next generation to receive it. They're preparing them to carry it forward. They each spoke words of wisdom to the people that they were passing it on to, so that the promise would have a continuation, so it wouldn't fall to the ground. Now, it would not necessarily have been lost, but rather it would have been hindered. They spoke words that would help promote this legacy, not hinder it to the next generation. Now, what can we take from this? Consider, what is the promise or legacy that God has given to your family and to you? There's often something that goes through families here. Just think about it. What's the form of it? Could it be a gift? Could it be a gift of, encouragement that goes from generation to generation? Could it be a gift of teaching? Could it be a gift of prophecy? And all these would be to build up the body of Christ. So if you're not really sure about this, ask the Lord about it. Take a bit of time, because you do have one. And think about, how can you prepare the next generation? How can you prepare the ones that are in your sphere of influence in your family? Just something to take to the Lord, especially at this time, a new year. Thank you.